Chapter 19. A Talk About Money. In almost everyone's life, there is one event that changes the whole course of his existence. The day Sam Beaver visited the Philadelphia Zoo was the turning point in his life. Up until that day, he had not been able to decide what he wanted to be when he grew up. The minute he saw the zoo, all his doubts vanished. He knew he wanted to work in a zoo. Sam loved every living thing, and a zoo is a great storehouse of living things. It has just about every creature that creeps or crawls or jumps or runs or flies or hides. Sam was eager to see them all, but he had Lewis's problem to solve first. He must save Serena from captivity. So he picked up his rucksack and his sleeping bag and walked into the birdhouse and entered the office. He walked tall and straight as though he were on a forest trail. The head man liked Sam's appearance and noticed that he looked a little like an Indian. "So you're Sam Beaver," said the head man as Sam advanced on him. "Why did you come here?" asked the head man. "To defend freedom," replied Sam. "I heard you intended to clip the wing of a swan. I'm here to ask you not to do it." Sam sat down, and they talked for a whole hour. Sam assured the head man that Lewis was an old friend. He told about discovering the swan's nest almost 3 years ago in Canada, about how Lewis came into the world lacking a voice, about Lewis's attending school in Montana and learning to read and write, about the theft of the trumpet by Lewis's father, the old cob, and about Camp Kookooskoos and the Swan boat in Boston. The head man listened with great attention, but he wasn't sure he believed a word of this strange tale. Then Sam explained his proposal for allowing Serena to go free instead of making a captive bird out of her. He said he thought it would be a good arrangement for the zoo because any time they wanted a young trumpeter swan, Lewis would give them one of his cygnets. The head man was fascinated. "You mean to say you came all the way to Philadelphia to help a bird?" "Yes, sir," replied Sam. "I would go anywhere to help a bird. Besides, Lewis is special. He's an old friend. We went to the same school. You've got to admit, he's quite a bird." "He sure is," said the head man. His Sunday afternoon concerts had been the biggest attraction the zoo has ever had. "We had a gorilla once named Bamboo. He's dead now. Bamboo was great, but Lewis draws even more of a crowd than Bamboo did. We have sea lions that draw big crowds, but nothing compared to with Lewis when he plays that horn on a Sunday afternoon. People go crazy, and music is good for the animals too. It soothes them, and they forget the cares of the day. I'm going to miss Lewis when he's gone. The whole zoo will miss him terribly. I wish he'd stay and keep his bride right here. It would be just great." "Lewis would pine away in captivity. He would die," replied Sam. "He needs wild places, little ponds, swamps, cattails, red-winged blackbirds in the spring, the chorus of the frogs, the cry of the loon at night. Lewis is following a dream. We must all follow a dream. Please let Serena go. Please don't clip her wing." The head man closed his eyes. He was thinking of little lakes deep in the woods, of the color of bulrushes, of the sounds of night and the chorus of frogs. He was thinking of swans' nests and eggs, and the hatching of eggs, and the cygnets following their father in a single file. He was thinking of dreams he had as a young man. "All right," he said suddenly. "Serena can go. We will not clip her wing. But how can I be sure that Lewis will bring me a young trumpeter swan when I need one? How do I know he's honest?" "He's an honorable bird," said Sam. "If he weren't honest and true to his word, he wouldn't have bothered to go out and earn a lot of money to pay the storekeeper back for the trumpet his father swiped." "How much money has Lewis got, anyway?" asked the head man. "He's got $4,691.65, said Sam. "We just counted it a few minutes ago. He received $100 from Camp Kookooskoos for playing bugle calls, and all he spent was 60 cents for postage stamps. So he arrived in Boston with $99.40. Then the Swan boat man paid him $100 for 1 week's work, but he spent $3 in tips at the hotel, where he spent a night. So he had $196.40 when he got to Philadelphia. The nightclub paid him $500 a week for 10 weeks, which came to $5,000. but he had to pay his agent 10% of the $5,000, and he also spent 75 cents for some new chalk pencils and $4 to send the telegram to me. So that makes a total of $4,691.65. It's a lot of money for a bird. It sure is, said the head man. It sure is. But he is going to pay my airplane fare from Montana to Philadelphia and back again. That will bring the total down to $4,420.78. The head man looked staggered by these figures. It's still a lot of money for a bird, he said. What's he going to do with it all? He will give it to his father, the old cob. And what's he going to do with it? He will fly back to the music store in Billings and give it to the owner to pay for the stolen trumpet. Give all of it? Yes, but a trumpet isn't worth $4,420.78. I know, said Sam, but there was some damage to the store itself. The old cob was going like the Dickens when he crashed through the plate glass window. He shook things up pretty badly. Yes, said the head man, but it still wouldn't take all that money to make things right. I guess not, said Sam, but Louis has no use for money anymore, and he's going to turn it all over to the owner of the music store. The subject of money seemed to interest the head man greatly. He thought how pleasant it would be not to have any more use for money. He leaned back in his chair. He found it hard to believe that one of his swans had been able to save more than $4,000, and that the money was right out there, hanging around his neck in a money bag. When it comes to money, he said, birds have it easier than men do. When a bird earns some money, it's almost all clear profit. A bird doesn't have to go to a supermarket and buy a dozen eggs and a pound of butter and 2 rolls of paper towels and a TV dinner and a can of Ajax and a can of tomato juice and a pound and a half of ground round steak and a can of sliced peaches and 2 quarts of fat-free milk and a bottle of stuffed olives. A bird doesn't have to pay rent on a house or interest on a mortgage. A bird doesn't insure its life with an insurance company and then have to pay premiums on the policy. A bird doesn't own a car and buy gas and oil and pay for repairs on the car and take the car to a car wash and pay to get it washed. Animals and birds are lucky. They don't keep acquiring things the way men do. You can teach a monkey to drive a motorcycle, but I have never known a monkey to go out and buy a motorcycle. That's right, replied Sam, but some animals do like to acquire things, even though they don't pay anything for them. Such as? Asked the head man. A rat, said Sam. A rat will fix up a home for himself, but then he'll bring home all sorts of little objects, trinkets and stuff, anything he can find that catches his eye. You're right, said the head man. You're absolutely right, Sam. You seem to know quite a lot about animals. I like animals, said Sam. I love to watch them. Then come with me and we'll explore the zoo, said the head man, getting up from his chair. I don't feel like working any more today. I'll show you the zoo. And away they went, the two of them. That night, Sam slept in the head man's office by special permission. He unrolled his sleeping bag on the floor and crawled in. The plane taking him back home would leave in the morning. Sam's head was full of everything he had seen at the zoo. And before he turned out the light, he took his notebook out of his rucksack and wrote a poem. This is what he wrote. Sam Beaver's poem. Of all the places on land and sea, Philadelphia Zoo is the place for me. There's plenty to eat and a lot to do. There's a frigate bird and a tiny shrew. There's a Vesper rat and a 2-toed sloth, and it's fair to say that I like them both. There's a Canada goose and a polar bear, and things that come from everywhere. There are lots of things you've never seen, like the kinkajou and the wolverine. You really have to go to the zoo to see a newborn wallaroo, or a fallow deer, or a white-tailed gnu. There are wondrous birds on a beautiful lake. There's a timber wolf and a hog-nosed snake. There are animals with great appeal, like the hummingbird and the harbor seal. There are pony rides, there are birds of prey, and something happening every day. There are wolves and foxes, hawks and owls, and a great big pit where the lion prowls. There are quiet pools and pleasant cages where reptiles lie and the tiger rages. The houses are clean, the keepers are kind, and one baboon has a pink behind. The entire aim of a well-kept zoo is to bring the animal world to you. Signed, Sam Beaver. Sam left the poem on the headman's desk. Early the next morning, long before the zoo people came to work, Sam left Philadelphia by plane. Louis and Serena went along with him to the airport. They wanted to wave goodbye. They also planned to leave Philadelphia right then and there and fly back to Montana. When the airport officials saw two big white birds out on the airstrip, they raised a terrible fuss. The men in the control tower sent warning messages to the pilots of incoming planes. Members of the ground crew came piling out of buildings and rushed toward Louis and Serena to chase them away. Sam was sitting by a window inside his plane, ready for takeoff, and he saw the whole thing. Louis grabbed his trumpet. "Off we go," he played, "into the wild blue yonder." The notes carried across the airport and startled everyone. "Coho, coho," called Louis. He put his trumpet away and started racing down the airstrip, with Serena racing after him. Just then, Sam's plane started into the wind for the takeoff. The two swans flew alongside. They were in the air before the plane was, and flying fast. Sam waved from the window. Louis's life-saving medal gleamed in the morning sun. The plane rose and started to climb. Louis and Serena climbed fast too. "Goodbye, Philadelphia," thought Louis. "Goodbye, Bird Lake. Goodbye, nightclub." The plane, with its greater speed, gained on the swans. They began to drop behind. For a little while they headed west, following the plane. Then Louis motioned to Serena that he was going to change course. He banked to the left and swung toward the south. "We'll go home by the southern route and take our time about it," he said to himself. And that's what they did. They flew south across Maryland and Virginia. They flew south across the Carolinas. They spent a night in Yemassee and saw huge oak trees with moss hanging from their branches. They visited the great swamps of Georgia and saw the alligator and listened to the mockingbird. They flew across Florida and spent a few days in a bayou where doves moaned in the cedars and little lizards crawled in the sun. They turned west into Louisiana. Then they turned northward toward their home in Upper Red Rock Lake. What a triumphant return it would be. When he left Montana, Louis had been penniless. Now he was rich. When he left, he had been unknown. Now he was famous. When he left, he had been alone in the world. Now he had his bride by his side, the swan that he loved. His medal was around his neck. His precious trumpet dangled in the breeze. His hard-earned money was in the bag. He had accomplished what he had set out to do, all in a few short months. Freedom felt so wonderful. Love felt so good. Chapter 20. Billings. On a bright, clear day in January, Louis and Serena came home to the Red Rock Lakes. From among the thousands of waterfall, they quickly found the members of their own families, their fathers and mothers and sisters and brothers. It was a noisy homecoming. Everybody wanted to say hello at once. "Coho, coho, coho!" The wanderers were home at last. Louis's father, the old cob, made a graceful speech, rather long, but sincere. Louis raised his trumpet and played, "There's no place like home, 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 sweet home." There was a great deal of gossip among the waterfowl about Louis's having persuaded Serena to be his wife. Everybody congratulated the happy couple, and all the brothers and sisters of Louis and Serena gathered around and looked at Louis's possessions. They were much impressed by his worldly goods. They liked the life-saving medal. They loved the sound of the trumpet. And they were eager to see the money in the money bag. But Louis did not open the bag. Instead, he took his father and mother to one side. They all three stepped out on shore, where Louis slipped the money bag off his neck and, with a bow, handed it to the old cob. $4,420.78. Then Louis took the slate and wrote a note to the owner of the music store in Billings, so his father would have something to show him when he got there. The note said, "To the storekeeper of Billings, enclosed please find $4,420.78. It will pay you for the trumpet and the damage to the store. Sorry about the inconvenience this has caused you." The old cob was not able to count money, and he was not able to read, but he took the money bag and the slate and hung them around his neck. He felt sure he could now pay his debt for the stolen trumpet. "I shall go," he said to his wife. "I shall redeem my honor. I shall return to Billings, the scene of my crime, a great city teeming with life. We've heard that before, remarked his wife. Just take the money and the note and beat it for Billings as fast as you can go. And when you get there, for heaven's sakes, be careful. The owner of that music store has a gun. He will remember the last time he saw Swan coming at him, he got robbed. So watch yourself. You're on a dangerous mission. Danger, said the old cob. Danger. I welcome danger and adventure. Danger is my middle name. I would risk my life to redeem my honor and recapture my sense of decency. I shall pay my debt and blot out the foul mark that sullies my good name. I shall rid myself forever of the shame that comes from thievery and wrongdoing. I shall. If you don't stop talking, said his wife, you won't get to Billings before the stores close. You are right, as usual, replied the cob. He adjusted the money bag and the slate for flight. Then he took off into the air and headed toward the northeast, flying fast and high. His wife and son watched him until he faded from view. What a swan, said his wife. You have a good father, Louis. I hope nothing happens to him. To tell you the truth, I'm worried. The old cob flew fast and far. When he spied the churches and factories and shops and homes of Billings, he circled one and then began his downward glide, straight for the music store. My hour has come, he said to himself. My moment of truth is at hand. I shall soon be out of debt, out from under the cloud of shame and dishonor that has cast a shadow over my life for lo these many months. The cob had been seen already by people down below. One of the salesmen in the music store was standing by the front window looking out. When he saw the big white bird approaching, he yelled to the storekeeper, Large bird approaching, get your gun. The storekeeper grabbed his shotgun and raced to the sidewalk. The cob was low in the sky, gliding straight for the store. The storekeeper raised his gun. He fired both barrels in quick succession. The old cob felt a twinge of pain in his left shoulder. Thoughts of death filled his mind. Looking back, he saw a bright red drop of blood staining his breast, but he kept going straight for the storekeeper. The end is near, he said to himself. I shall die in the performance of duty. I have only a few moments remaining to live. Man in his folly has given me a mortal wound. The red blood flows in a steady trickle from my veins. My strength fails, but even in death's final hour, I shall deliver the money for the trumpet. Goodbye, life. Goodbye, beautiful world. Goodbye, little lakes in the north. Farewell, springtimes I have known, with their passion and ardor. Farewell, loyal wife and loving sons and daughters. I, who am about to die, salute you. I must die gracefully, as only a swan can. With that, he sank to the sidewalk, held out the money bag and slate to the astonished storekeeper, and fainted away at the sight of his own blood. He lay limp on the sidewalk, to all appearances a dying swan. A crowd quickly gathered. What's this? Exclaimed the storekeeper, bending over the bird. What's going on here? He quickly read the note on the slate. Then he tore open the money bag and began pulling out $100 bills and $50 bills. A policeman hurried to the scene and started to hold the crowd back. Stand back, he shouted. The swan is wounded. Give him air. He's dead, said a little boy. The bird is dead. He is not dead, said the salesman. He's scared. Call an ambulance, screamed a lady in the crowd. A small pool of blood formed under the neck of the old cob. He seemed lifeless. Just then a game warden appeared. Who shot this bird? He demanded. I did, said the storekeeper. Then you're under arrest, said the warden. What for? Asked the storekeeper. For shooting a trumpeter swan. These birds are protected by law. You can't pull a gun on a wild swan. Well, replied the storekeeper, you can't arrest me either. I happen to know his bird. He's a thief. He's the one you should arrest. He's been here before, and he stole a trumpet from my store. Call an ambulance, cried the lady. What's that you've got in your hand? Asked the policeman. The storekeeper quickly stuffed the money back into the money bag and held the bag and the slate behind his back. Come on, show it to me, said the cop. I want to see it too, said the warden. We all want to see it, cried a fellow in the crowd. What's in that bag? The storekeeper sheepishly handed the money bag and the slate to the game warden. The warden stood straight, put on his glasses, and read the note in a loud voice. To the storekeeper of Billings, enclosed please find $4,420.78. It will pay you for the trumpet and the damage to the store. Sorry about the inconvenience this has caused you." At the mention of the sum of the money, the crowd gasped. Everyone started talking at once. "Call an ambulance," screamed the lady. "I'll have to take that money to the station house," called the policeman. "This is a complicated case. Anything that involves money is complex. I'll take the money and keep it safe until the matter is decided." "No, you won't," said the game warden. "The money is mine." "Why?" asked the policeman. "Because," replied the warden. "Because what?" asked the policeman. "Because the law says the bird is in my custody. The money was on the bird. Therefore, the money goes to me until this is settled." "Oh, no, you don't," said the storekeeper angrily. "The money is mine. It says so right here on this slate. The $4,420.78 is mine. Nobody's going to take it away from me." "Yes, they are," said the policeman. "I am." "No, I am," said the game warden. "Is there a lawyer in the crowd?" asked the storekeeper. "We'll settle this matter right here and now." A tall man stepped forward. "I'm Judge Ricketts," he said. "I'll decide this case. Now then, who saw the bird arrive?" "I did," said the salesman. "Call an ambulance," screamed the lady. "I saw the bird too," said a small boy named Alfred Gore. "Okay," said the judge. "Describe what happened exactly as you saw it." The salesman spoke first. "Well," he said, "I was looking out the window and saw a swan approaching, so I hollered. The boss got his gun and fired, and the bird fell to the sidewalk. There was a drop or two of blood." "Did you notice anything special about the bird?" asked Judge Ricketts. "He carried money," replied the salesman. "You don't often see any money on a bird, so I noticed it." "All right," said the judge. "Now, we'll let Alfred Gore tell it as he saw it." "Describe what you saw, Alfred." "Well," said the little boy, "I was very thirsty, and so I wanted to go to a candy store and get something to drink." "Just tell me what you saw, please, Alfred," said the judge. "Never mind how thirsty you were." "I was coming along the street," continued Alfred, "because I was very thirsty. So I was coming along the street on my way to the candy store to get something to drink, and there, up in the sky, all of a sudden, there was a big white bird right over me in the sky, and he was sliding down out of the sky like this." Alfred held out his arms and imitated a bird. "And so when I saw the big bird, I stopped thinking about how thirsty I was, and pretty soon this enormous bird, he was enormous, was on the sidewalk, and he was dead, and there was blood all over everything, and that's what I saw." "Did you notice anything special about the bird?" asked Judge Ricketts. "Blood," said Alfred. "Anything else?" "No, just blood." "Did you hear a gun?" "No, just blood," said Alfred. "Thank you," said the judge. "That will be all." Just then a siren started wailing. "Woo! Woo! Woo!" An ambulance came screaming down the street. It stopped in front of the crowd. Two men jumped out. They carried a stretcher and set it down next to where the swan lay. The old cop lifted his head and looked around. "I have been at death's door," he thought, "and now I think I am returning to life. I am reviving. I shall live. I shall return on strong wings to the great sky. I shall glide gracefully again on the ponds of the world, and hear the frogs and take pleasure in the sounds of night and the coming of day." As he was thinking these pleasant thoughts, he felt himself being lifted. The ambulance attendants put his slate around his neck, picked him up, laid him gently on the stretcher, and carried him into the ambulance, which had a red light whirling round and around on top of it. One of the men placed an oxygen mask over the old cop's head and gave him some oxygen, and away they drove, making a great deal of noise, to the hospital. There he was put to bed and given a shot of penicillin. A young doctor came in and examined the wound where the shotgun pellet had hit him. The doctor said the wound was superficial. The old cop didn't know what superficial meant, but it sounded serious. Nurses gathered around. One of them took the swan's blood pressure and wrote something on a chart. The old cob was beginning to feel very well again. It felt good to be in bed, being cared for by nurses, one of whom was quite pretty. The doctor washed the wound and put a Band-Aid on it. Meantime, back on the sidewalk, in front of the music store, the judge was announcing his decision. "On the basis of the testimony," he said solemnly, "I award the money to the storekeeper to make up for the loss of the trumpet and damage to the store. I am placing the swan in the custody of the game warden." Your Honor, said the warden, don't forget that the storekeeper is under arrest for shooting a wild swan. It was a case of false arrest, said the judge wisely. The storekeeper fired his gun at the bird because he was afraid his store would be robbed again. He did not know that the swan was bringing money to pay for the trumpet. The gun was fired in self-defense. Everyone is innocent, the swan is honest, the debt is paid, the storekeeper is rich, and the case is dismissed. A cheer went up from the crowd. The warden looked sulky. The policeman looked glum. But the storekeeper was beaming. He was a happy man. He felt that justice had been done. I have an announcement, he said. I am only going to keep just enough of this money to pay for the stolen trumpet and the repair bills for my store. All of the rest of the money will be given to a good cause if I can think of just the right one. Can anyone think of a worthy cause that needs money? The Salvation Army, suggested a woman. No, said the storekeeper. The Boy Scouts, suggested a boy. No, said the storekeeper. The American Civil Liberties Union, suggested a man. Nope, said the storekeeper. Nobody has thought of just the right place for me to send this money. How about the Audubon Society? Asked a little fellow whose nose looked like the beak of a bird. Great, you've got it, cried the storekeeper. A bird has been very good to me, and now I want to do something for birds. The Audubon Society is kind to birds. I want this money to be used to help birds. Some birds are in real trouble. They face extinction. What's extinction? Asked Alfred Gore. Does it mean they stink? Certainly not, said the storekeeper. Extinction is what happens when you're extinct, when you don't exist anymore because there are no others like you, like the passenger pigeon and the eastern hearth hen and the dodo and the dinosaur. The trumpeter swan was almost extinct, said the game warden. People kept shooting them, like this crazy storekeeper, but now they are making a comeback. The storekeeper glared at the warden. I'll say they're making a comeback, he said. The swan that was just coming here came back to Billings with $4,420.78 and gave it all to me. I call that making a very good comeback. I can't imagine where he got all that money. It's a mighty funny thing. The storekeeper went back into his music store, the policeman went back to the station house, the judge went back to the courthouse, the game warden walked off down the street toward the hospital, and Alfred Gore, who was still thirsty, continued his journey to the candy store. All the rest of the people wandered away. At the hospital, the old cob lay peacefully in bed thinking beautiful thoughts. He felt thankful to be alive and relieved to be out of debt. It was getting dark. Many of the patients in the hospital were asleep already. A nurse came into the cob's room to open his window. When she came back a few minutes later to take the cob's temperature and give him a back rub, the bed was empty. The room was deserted. The cob had jumped out of the window, spread his broad wings, and headed for home through the cold night sky. He flew all night, crossed the mountains, and arrived home soon after daylight, where his wife was waiting for him. How did it go? She asked. Very well, he said. An extraordinary adventure. I was shot at just as you predicted. The storekeeper pointed a gun at me and fired. I felt an agonizing pain in my left shoulder, which I've always considered the more beautiful of my two shoulders. Blood gushed from my wound in torrents, and I sank gracefully to the sidewalk, where I handed over the money and thus regained my honor and my decency. I was at death's door. A great multitude of people gathered. Blood was everywhere. I became faint and passed out with dignity in front of all. The police arrived, dozens of them. Game wardens flocked to the scene in great numbers, and there was a tremendous argument about the money. How did you know all this if you were unconscious? Asked his wife. My dear, said the cop, I wish you wouldn't interrupt me when I'm telling the story of my trip. Seeing my grave condition, someone in the crowd summoned an ambulance, and I was taken to the hospital where I was put to bed. I looked very beautiful lying there, my black bill contrasting with the snowy white sheets. Doctors and nurses attended me and comforted me in my hour of suffering and pain. You can judge how serious my wound was when I tell you that one of the doctors examined it and said it was superficial. Doesn't look bad to me, said his wife. I think you just got nicked. If it had been bad, you couldn't have flown back so soon. Anyway, superficial or not, I'm glad to see you home safe. I always miss you when you're gone. I don't know why, but I do. And with that, she placed her head across his neck and gave him a slight nudge. Then they had breakfast and went for a swim in an open place in the frozen lake. The cob pulled his Band-Aid off and threw it away. Chapter 21. The Greening Spring. Louis and Serena were more in love than ever. When spring came, they flew north, Louis wearing his trumpet and his slate and his chalk pencil and his medal, Serena wearing nothing at all. Now that he no longer had to work and earn, Louis felt a great sense of relief. No more would he have to carry a money bag around his neck. The two swans flew high and fast, 10,000 feet above the earth. They arrived at last at the little pond in the wilderness where Louis had been hatched. This was his dream, to return with his love to the place in Canada where he had first seen the light of day. He escorted Serena from one end of the pond to the other and back again. He showed her the tiny island where his mother's nest had been. He showed her the log Sam Beaver had been sitting on when Louis had pulled his shoelace because he couldn't say beep. Serena was enchanted. They were in love. It was spring. The frog was waking from his long sleep. The turtle was coming to life again after his nap. The chipmunk felt the warm air, soft and kind, blow through the trees, just as it did in that springtime when Louis's father and mother had visited the pond to nest and raise their young. The sun shone down strong and steady. Ice was melting. Patches of open water appeared on the pond. Louis and Serena felt the changing world, and they stirred with new life and rapture and hope. There was a smell in the air, a smell of earth waking after its long winter. The trees were putting out tiny green buds. The buds were swelling. A better, easier time was at hand. A pair of mallard ducks flew in. A sparrow with a white throat arrived and sang, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." Serena chose a muskrat lodge on which to build her nest. It was the right height above the water. The muskrats had built it of mud and sticks. Louis had hoped his wife might decide to make her nest in the same spot where his mother had built hers. But females are full of notions. They want their own way, pretty much, and Serena knew what she was doing. Louis was so delighted when he saw her begin to construct the nest. He didn't really care where it was. He raised his horn to his mouth and played the beginning of an old song called "It's Delightful to be Married, to be married." Then he helped by bringing a few pieces of coarse grass. Rain or shine, cold or warm, every day was a happy day for the two swans. In time the eggs were laid and the cygnets were hatched, 4 of them. The first sound the baby swans heard was the pure, strong sound of their father's trumpet. "Oh, ever in the greening spring," he played, "by bank and bough retiring." Life was gay and busy and sweet in the little lonely pond in the north woods. Once in a while Sam Beaver would show up for a visit, and they would have great times together. Louis never forgot his old jobs, his old friends, or his promise to the head man in charge of birds in Philadelphia. As the years went by, he and Serena returned each spring to the pond, nested, and had their young, and each year at the end of the summer, when the molt was over and the flight feathers grew back in and the cygnets were ready to try their wings, Louis took his family for a long pleasure trip across America. He led them first to Camp Kookooskoos, where he had saved the life of Applegate Skinner and won his medal. The camp would be closed for the season, but Louis liked to revisit it and wander around, remembering the boys and how he had earned his first $100 as camp bugler. Then the swans would fly to Boston, where the swan boat man always gave them a big welcome. Louis would polish up his horn, blow the spit out of it, and swim in front of the boats again, playing "Row, row, row your boat." And the people of Boston would hear the familiar sound of the trumpet of the swan and would flock to the public garden. Then the boatman would treat Louis and Serena to a night at the Ritz Hotel, while the cygnets spent the night by themselves on the lake, watched over by the boatman. Serena dearly loved the Ritz. She ate dozens of watercress sandwiches and gazed at herself in the mirror and swam in the bathtub. And while Louis stood and looked out of the window at the public garden down below, Serena would walk around turning lights on and off for the fun of it. Then they would both get into the bathtub and go to sleep. From Boston, Louis would lead his family to the Philadelphia Zoo and show them Bird Lake. Here, he would be greeted warmly by the head man in charge of birds. If the zoo needed a young trumpeter swan to add to its collection of waterfowl, Louis would donate one of his cygnets just as he had promised. In later years, Philadelphia was also a place where they would see Sam Beaver. Sam took a job with the zoo just as soon as he was old enough to go to work. He and Louis always had a great time when they got together. Louis would get out his slate, and they would have a long talk about old times. After visiting Philadelphia, Louis would fly south with his wife and children so they could see the great savannas where alligators dozed in the swamp water and turkey buzzards soared in the sky. And then they would return home to spend the winter in the Red Lakes of Montana, in the lovely, serene Centennial Valley, where all trumpeter swans feel safe and unafraid. The life of a swan must be a very pleasant and interesting life, and of course Louis's life was particularly pleasant because he was a musician. Louis took good care of his trumpet. He kept it clean and spent hours polishing it with the tips of his wing feathers. As long as he lived, he felt grateful to his father, the brave cop who had risked his life in order to give him the trumpet he needed so badly. Every time Louis looked at Serena, he remembered that the sound of the trumpet was what had made her willing to become his mate. Swans often live to be very old. Year after year, Louis and Serena returned in spring to the same small pond in Canada to raise their family. The days were peaceful. Always, just at the edge of dark, when the young cygnets were getting sleepy, Louis would raise his trumpet and play taps, just as he used to at camp long ago. The notes were sad and beautiful as they floated across the still water and up into the night sky. One summer, when Sam Beaver was about 20, he and his father were sitting in their camp in Canada. It was after supper. Mr. Beaver was rocking in a chair, resting after a day of fishing. Sam was reading a book. "Pop," said Sam, "what does crepuscular mean?" "How should I know?" replied Mr. Beaver. "I have never heard that word before." "It has something to do with rabbits," said Sam. "It says here that a rabbit is a crepuscular animal." "Probably means timid," said Mr. Beaver. "Or maybe it means that it can run like the dickens. Or maybe it means stupid. A rabbit will sit right in the middle of the road at night and stare into your headlights and never get out of the way, and that's how a lot of rabbits get run over. They're stupid." "Well," said Sam, "I guess the only way to find out what crepuscular means is to look it up in the dictionary." "We haven't got a dictionary here," said Mr. Beaver. "You'll have to wait till we get back to the ranch." Just then, over the pond where the swans were, Louis raised his horn and played taps to let his children know that the day had come to an end. The wind was right, and the sound carried across the swamp. Mr. Beaver stopped rocking. "That's funny," he said. "I thought I heard the sound of a trumpet just then." "I don't see how you could," replied Sam. "We're alone in these woods." "I know we are," said Mr. Beaver. "Just the same, I thought I heard a trumpet, or a bugle." Sam chuckled. He had never told his father about the swans in the pond nearby. He kept their secret to himself. When he went to the pond, he always went alone. That's the way he liked it, and that's the way the swans liked it. "Whatever happened to your friend Louis?" asked Mr. Beaver. "Louis was a trumpeter. You don't suppose he's somewhere around here, do you?" "He might be," said Sam. "Have you heard from him recently?" asked Mr. Beaver. "No," replied Sam. "He doesn't write any more. He ran out of postage stamps, and he has no money to buy stamps with." "Oh," said Mr. Beaver. "Well, the whole business about that bird was very strange. I never did fully understand it." Sam looked across at his father and saw that his eyes had closed. Mr. Beaver was falling asleep. There was hardly a sound to disturb the stillness of the woods. Sam was tired and sleepy too. He got out his notebook and sat down at the table by the light of the kerosene lamp. This is what he wrote. "Tonight I heard Louis's horn. My father heard it too. The wind was right, and I could hear the notes of taps just as darkness fell. There is nothing in all the world I like better than the trumpet of the swan." What does crepuscular mean? Sam put his notebook away. He undressed and slid into bed. He lay there wondering what crepuscular meant. In less than 3 minutes, he was fast asleep. On the pond where the swans were, Lewis put his trumpet away. The cygnets crept under their mother's wings. Darkness settled on woods and fields and marsh. A loon called its wild night cry. As Lewis relaxed and prepared for sleep, all his thoughts were of how lucky he was to inhabit such a beautiful earth, how lucky he had been to solve his problems with music, and how pleasant it was to look forward to another night of sleep and another day tomorrow, and the fresh morning and the light that returns with the day.